Okay, so the title of the talk, Stop Building the Wrong Things Righter, Build the Right Things. This is, I know we've seen, you've probably all seen that Standish Group report which talks about feature usage and the waste of it. This one was kind of interesting. I haven't seen this around very much. It was at a Joint Aerospace Weapons Systems Support Symposium. What they found is that the government had spent $35.7 billion on software. As you can see there, 2% was used as delivered. So what you gave the client, they could actually put straight to purpose and use. Software used after changes, so they had to do something to it, 3%. Software used but reworked or even abandoned, 20%. Software paid for but not delivered, wow, 25%. Then on the left, we have a whopping software delivered but not successfully used, 46%. So that's telling us something. It's telling us that what we're building and delivering, even if we get it out there, isn't always the right thing. So of course, a lot of you are Agilistas, and we looked at what was going on and we said, well, it must be the process. It's probably that evil waterfall. And actually, I was looking for stock photos and I typed in evil waterfall, and that is exactly what came back. And so we thought we're going to come up with silver bullet process, because if we just fix the process, then everything would be right. And this is the picture of the infamous process wars that have been happening in the last decade. Scrum versus Kanban. Is Lean better, or Scrum better, or which Agile flavor is better? So did it help? One of the reasons I've been thinking a lot about this space is I'm writing a book on how to create legal contracts for more Agile and Lean projects. And in doing so, I did a lot of research into success rates with projects and the data behind it. And it's interesting, we seem to be doing more stuff faster, but I'm really not convinced we're building better products in the meantime. Or are we just building the wrong thing righter? I don't know if you have this term in Scandinavia. It's called lipstick on a pig. It means that you can put lipstick on a pig, but it's still a pig. So the idea being, for me, it doesn't matter how fast your Agile teams can go. If you're heading in the wrong direction, you're going to fail. You might fail faster, which is one of the promises of Agile, but you're still failing, right? So we need to get these teams heading in the right direction. Let's look at how people currently measure progress. And again, this is a fundamental piece of the legal contracts. What's in them is all about how they measure progress and delivery. Now, up the top, we have activity-based. If you look at typical sequential waterfall, it's very activity-based. We know that we've made progress because planning is complete. We have then completed design, development, etc. So those are our markers. Now, of course, the Agilistas said, well, that doesn't work. That's ridiculous, because all you have after planning is a set of documents. You have nothing of value. So, of course, they came in with the answers, which is that we are going to deliver working software. And that means that we're now delivering lots of bits of code to you instead of paper. And we might track progress with things like throughput, velocity. How many people are actually doing things like velocity, story point at work? And who has managers looking at your velocity numbers? One big company we're working with, people have to keep their velocity at least the same or steadily increasing, right? I'm watching that going, wow, you can do more stuff faster. Congratulations. How useful is that? And also, it means from an innovation standpoint, when I see teams with constant velocity or velocity that goes up and never down, I don't see people experimenting. I actually think that's a very dangerous thing. No one takes the time to learn to get better. There was a good story of Tiger Woods, the golf player, and he is obviously very good at the way he plays golf. Rest of his life, maybe not. But every now and again, he'll take one of his killer shots, the ones that's really great, and he'll break it down. He'll start again. He'll redo it over and over and learn new things, and his game will actually go down before it goes up better than before. So this idea of you've got to fail and learn, sometimes even in the Agile community, by looking at metrics, the wrong metrics, things like velocity, we can stop that spirit of failing and learning from it. So which sounds better? Our velocity is 46 points and we delivered 100 new features. Right? Is this the sort of thing you often hear at work? We just delivered. I love that. I was at a meeting once and the manager said, we just delivered 35 features on time and on budget. And I'm sitting there thinking, yeah, but did you make money? Were the customers happy? Could you have done it with 2 instead of 35? That means nothing, absolutely meaningless. So listen to this. We just implemented one feature in 3 days, which will save us £12 million over the next year. Which one sounds better to management? Yeah. So we're going through with our product owner teams and really training them to readjust the way they talk about progress. Output is not the answer. So now we have the silver bullet. Of course, we all have the silver bullet. We'll see if that's really true. But the idea is to build outcomes over outputs. What you want to be doing is saying, these are the results we need. Now let's figure out how to get there. It's not about more features. More features is not the game. So think of outcomes. They are the destination you want to get to. And then we have options, which are the potential solutions. These are the ways that we can get there. So this is this target outcomes framework that I've been developing with Ryan Shriver over in the US. And we're putting this in place with a focus on let's always be able to measure the outcomes, figure out the different ways we could get there, and then work out which are the best investments to try out. What's interesting with this outcomes option model is one outcome, one destination we want to get to can have multiple ways to get there. On the other hand, one option, one potential solution can affect multiple outcomes in the company. And I'll give you some examples of outcomes in a moment. I don't know if anyone's seen this idea of Indra's net. It's a Buddhist idea, but it's this idea of it's a mirror image of the world. So if you look at a drop of water, you can see the world reflected. So it's this reflective cycle. I think one of the reasons people have trouble getting to these outcomes models is they try to simplify them. They try to put them in a sequential or hierarchical environment, whereas it's far more complicated because we're dealing with systems. So one change we make in a system affects multiple pieces of it. So it's actually quite a complex model. So simple steps that we'll talk through just so you get an idea of how to do it. Step one, we're going to get a deep understanding. So remember we talked earlier, we don't want to know how, or even what actually. I think why comes first. Why are we doing it? Number two, we're going to set the goals. Where do we need to get to? Let's make sure that's incredibly clear. Everybody understands it. 3, come up with potential solutions. A to Z. We could do all of these things. Some are high cost, some are low cost. Some might get us high value, some low value. Let's figure out which ones might work, knowing that, of course, they're all guesses. So until we start validating and testing, we don't know which ones are really useful. Step 4, we're going to go into our little iterative cycles of some sort. We're going to deliver something, measure the progress against the outcomes, and adapt what we're doing. Constant flow. Do over and over until bored, rich, or famous. So let's start with deep understanding. Now, I have kept this talk deliberately short. If you have some questions during it, feel free to ask them. Okay. I'm going to start with some ideas around guerrilla research. Personally, after doing this for a long time, I think research is too important to leave to the researchers. There's a really big difference between taking the people out to see and understand the environment compared to being handed a report about what users are doing. The gentleman up the back who said, you know, the users, the A/B situation. Once you really see these people, I don't know if this product owner got a report, but it's really different when you see someone using it. Who was in my talk the other day? Hands up. Okay, there's a little bit of overlap. Apologize for that. Now, when we were testing something at Yahoo, we found that we would hand off a report saying, look, these developers, our customers are having a real trouble using the product. It was a photos product and we had Ajax had just come out. So you drag and drop things around the screen. This was so new that while the executives, everybody thought, this is great, we love it, the developers thought it was the best solution, the user experience people were very worried that the customers wouldn't be able to do it. They kept telling us, or telling the team, writing reports, nothing happened. Finally, they did a usability lab where they called in some of the team members and said, come and watch what's happening. So of course, in came a customer. We said, go and put your photos in an album. You saw them then trying to struggle. They didn't know how to do it. They sat there going, can't do it. So one of the developers behind the screen, watching it, went, oh, now I understand. Quickly types in a change, pushes it. By the time the next person comes in for the study, that is fixed. So there's something about seeing it and knowing what's going on that's really important. One of the great sort of think tank innovation incubator companies, IDEO in America, had an interesting story where they went out to look into children's toothbrushes. So they were hired by one of the big toothbrush companies. They said, find us a good model, a good design for a children's toothbrush. So of course they go into the field and they will take their team there. And they went into the field and watched. Now what's really interesting, who's got children? Yeah, most Scandinavians do. I know that sounds weird, but you're prolific with children over here. And so they went out, and anyone with little children, the idea is little children have little hands, therefore they need a little toothbrush. Of course, when children grab the toothbrush, they grab it like this. So they actually have no fine motor skills. So when watching that, they thought, oh, that's completely wrong. We don't need a little toothbrush. We actually need the opposite. We need a really big toothbrush to make it easier for them to hold. So they got that through observing the users. This is something that I encourage my teams to do everywhere. A lot of you are working on internal systems. Nothing like going in and sitting beside the real users in your company to find out, not say, what do you want? That's the worst question ever. As Henry Ford said, if I asked my customers what they wanted, I would have built a faster horse. Instead, we want to say, what are you trying to do? What's the goal? Now let's figure out the easiest way to make that happen. There's guerrilla data research. And I'm going to give you an example on this. I'm going to take you through a short case study. So data will be the most powerful weapon for making product decisions when you can gather it. So one part is observing, really understanding how our users think. The other side is to really look at the patterns of usage and see what's going on. So I'm going to use a model, acme.com, not a real company. They are an online retailer. Think of them like an Amazon. They have a problem in that customer abandonment rates are very high. So 32% of people who go in to buy a book complete the transaction. 58% of them don't and never actually return. So they're concerned about this, as one would be. So what the marketing guys said was, we need more features. Features are so win-win. One company I worked at in Silicon Valley, I got so frustrated. I was told we had to take the company public in 6 months, so fix all these problems, help the company grow. And when I looked around and looked at the problems we're having, we had multiple lists of features to pump out the door. And after a while, I thought, this is crazy. This isn't the problem. There was a Chew study that said 60% of defects are actually learnability and usability problems. They're not technical issues at all. So I went up to the executive board and I said, look, what we have to do is actually make our site perform really well. It's a quality issue. It's very hard. It took people something like, 8 clicks to get into a chat room. And I was like, this is what's killing our product. And, as I said to them, do you go to Amazon or eBay every week to get a new feature? No. You go there because you want something. You want to buy a book. For our users, they wanted to get into a chat room. It has to be as easy to do as possible. Now, in the real world, this isn't so easy. We had a really big issue at the time that the head of sales said every page they click on, we get ad impressions, so we get money. That's a lot of money. We cannot remove pages. So I looked at that and said, well, you know what? If the user can't get there in less than 3 clicks, we're going to lose everybody anyway. It's going to be too hard. So if that's the outcome you need as a sales guy, you want more revenue from advertising, correct? I'm like, yeah. Okay, so at the moment, we had about 3 different banner ads on the page. I looked at the click-through rate, not good, again, looking at the data. and said, let's try an experiment. Let's take 2% of our traffic, and what we're going to do is we're going to make it 3 clicks to get in the chat room, and instead of all these little banner ads, we're going to put one big box rich media ad. Looks great, it's only one, it's not distracting, etc. Turns out that one made double the money of the other advertising model, because the ads were so much more compelling, people clicked on it, we could sell them at a premium, we had longer term campaigns because the bigger clients wanted to build it. So that's how we diffused a situation which is really difficult. If you're in product ownership, it's not an easy job, right? You're constantly getting everybody's opinions about what's important, what the solutions are, and we want to get back beyond that. We want to use data to say, we're going to prove it to you. We don't need to keep arguing about it. Let's see what happens. And what the developers said, this is, we used to say at Yahoo, your developers are not you. The developers want the cool technical solution. I don't know if anyone went to that talk the other day about quantum Perl. Yeah. If you went, it was really funny. What the web analytics said. So what we found out is actually 38% proceed to checkout shipping, 19% proceed to checkout, 15% confirmation, etc. This is a funnel which is showing the drop-off. What was interesting is that a lot of people simply wanted shipping information, right? So we'd buried it right within the purchase flow. As soon as we removed that and put it up front, people didn't have to start the cycle. So again, we started cleaning up the data to find out where do we have the biggest problems, how are we going to fix it? Anyone who's familiar with lean and value stream mapping, think of doing a value stream for your product. It's a way of seeing where are the biggest bottlenecks, where is the waste. Those are the problems you attack first. So you can see what we're doing here. We're already starting to filter things out, because the tyranny of Agile is we can build a lot fast. That's a good thing and a bad thing. It means that we can simply have to give features. It's what I call the machine gun approach. By taking so many shots, we may hit our target, but it's incredibly wasteful in the process. You can run things like surveys. We can find out that some people had a payment issue, some people were just comparison shopping, which is interesting. When you see things like comparison shopping, you think, hey, we'll match any other online price. Maybe we can retain these customers after all. Pages are really slow to load. Wow, that's a huge problem. So once we have an understanding of what the issues are, we can go deeper. There's some great techniques out of Toyota, the A3 thinking. You ask why 5 times, you do value stream mapping. Anything that gives you a big systemic, deep understanding of the core problems will help you. Because now I know, okay, we have a problem. I'm going to go for that bottom one. Pages are slow to load. What could be some solutions to pages are slow to load? Caching, yep. Restructure the pages, could be, yep. Remove stuff that you don't use, yep. All sorts of things. Could be latency, etc. We actually found that we had multiple problems. One solution that we wanted to try out was caching some page elements. One was, let's try some usability experiments. One was, you know what? Actually, the people who live in New Zealand and Australia have the hardest time because the data center is based in Europe. Maybe we need a local data center. Actually, we might have some network latency issues. So now we've got options, right? I call them options because I don't want to say they're solutions or that we have epics or requirements at this point. I want everybody to know all they are our best guess at the time, and until we try something and test it out, we won't know which ones are valid. Again, anyone who's caught up in this whole lean startup movement will know that at this point, we want to start validating our ideas. We can do a high-level filter and say, out of all of these ideas, which one's cheap and easy, let's get some feedback. Things like caching page elements, pretty quick and easy, right? I might do that tomorrow and see if we get a change. Data center, that sounds kind of expensive, but maybe I will just go simply set up one server in Australia, divert 0.5% or something of my traffic, start getting an idea, is that one going to make a big difference or not? Because at the moment, again, until you have data, you don't know what the real problem is. Don't just start throwing solutions at the problem too early. And always keep an eye on what the customers actually need. That chat application, they just needed to chat. Most businesses are not that difficult. Amazon, you want to buy a book, right? Skype, you want to make a call. And what I constantly see, anyone who's been abused by bad products will understand, sometimes it feels like people are putting everything in your way to make your one goal difficult to obtain. So our job, instead of building more stuff to put in their way, is to work out what to remove to simplify that experience. This is the idea of remove the inessential so the essential can speak. When you have 100 features on the page, you don't know which one the user wants, which one's really powerful or not. So let's go on to setting the target outcomes. This is where it gets, you can get very deep into this. Tom Gilb is one of the people who's been doing this since the 60s, and he talks about quantifying outcomes. So outcomes, again, people from the Agile community, if you think of that analogy, things like Scrum, we're playing a team sport, but the idea is it's only when we get that ball over the goal do we succeed. So what we're doing at the moment is setting the goalposts. With target outcomes, it's a good idea to keep them really big, simple, and visual. What I find with management, people think they want big, complicated reports. It's the exact opposite. If you put a nice one-pager together with some beautiful, pretty graphics showing where you are, talk about the things they care about, how much money they're making, how much you're spending, where we're heading on our target outcome, they'll be just happy with that. So this target outcome, let's say that we had a site like our acme.com online retailer, and Amazon, when they started, it took about 2 weeks to buy a book. Now you would have a target outcome saying, eventually, maybe they started off saying, let's get that down to a week. What can we do to bring it down to a week, the entire cycle from when you decide you want a book to getting it in your hand? Where have we got the big gaps? Why does it take 2 weeks? Maybe it's from when we send the order through to shipping. Maybe we need to make that a more effective process. Whatever we do and we start playing up those options, we can use these progress indicators. So you can see we start at 2 weeks, that's the blue. Then everything we do, we can start showing how it's progressively getting us to our target. I think this is the big difference between people saying, we have these KPIs, these metrics, we want to get to this end state, but there's nothing in between, no visibility on are we making progress. Someone will say, we're going to make $50 million. And at the end, no one actually really checks whether they did or not. With this model, we want to be constantly looking at the metrics, every iteration, to see is what we're doing having an impact. If not, stop doing it, don't waste the money. Remember I talked about Indra's net, that everything is connected? So if we had a target outcome at the top, which is to improve the speed it takes to have someone get a book, we can follow that all the way down. Even in the back-end layers, we might say, well, we know that we get more drop-off when people obviously can't get to the site. So let's measure the quality of the system. Let's look at availability. And in this one, we've said, you know what? Currently, we've got 97.5 uptime. If we get below 97%, that's going to be massive failure. We've got to watch. We can never get down there. We want to get up to between 98 and 99.8 uptime. That's what we're actually looking for. We can again measure our current progress and see, are we getting the system to the right levels? Now, what happens with target outcomes, which is interesting, is you can link them all the way up from the top of the company saying, we want to make more money, we want to get more customers, we want to keep the customers we have, all the way down to the back-end systems and show the causation and impact that each one has that can affect the other meta outcomes. We're actually running these models in a couple of companies at the moment, one in Europe and one in the UK. And we have a net of value, and it goes through the entire company. Every product decision is tied back to how these metrics will help and how the outcomes will get affected. That's actually, personally, after doing Agile for a long time, I'm finding that this is having a lot more faster impact on the right products. Earlier when I said, we made 12 million in 3 days, that was a real story. Through looking at the data, in the first week when I got to a company, we put in a change that saved them 12 million in the next year. This is pretty compelling. Any consultants in the room? Yeah, you can imagine how well that sells, right? In your first 3 days, we just saved you 12 million. So the goals are not only, the outcomes are not only from the technical side, the product, the business, but you think about the goals for the people. Again, we want to be doing goal mapping. So the way that I'll arrange my outcomes, the next step down to decompose them, is into the user goals. So we create journeys through the system. How do we help them obtain their goal? When you can do that, that's how you start breaking down your work, and this is what you can run your sprints or cycles, depending on the method you're using. Again, this model is most suited to iterative or flow-based work because we need the fast feedback cycles. We're going to create the options. These are our potential solutions. So here's an example. I wanted to improve the shopping cart conversion. Here's the problem that I've stated. People abandon it. The impact, if we convert 1% of our users, that will total £14 million per year. So every 1% of conversion that we can improve upon is worth a lot of money. Okay. Here's some different options I've got up there. I've got things like usability, availability. We've talked about things like caching page elements. I've got things like I might want to do price testing. Again, if you're running things like big websites, you'll set up frameworks to be able to divert your traffic. You've probably heard about A/B or multivariate testing, where you want to run multiple versions and see which of these things will really have an impact on our customers. Do you know who's one of the best companies at doing this in the world that I know of? Who really runs on numbers? Do you remember? You were in my talk the other day. I'll give you a hint. Amazon. So Amazon, if you read some of the stories about Jeff Bezos, they have down to a fine art. That's why when you get on Amazon, you can buy a book immediately, right? You click on that one-click buy, and you have a book downloading. They do it through intensely looking at the data and usage patterns all the time. The thing with options is we don't have to play them out. Again, I like using the word options. Chris Matz, a friend of mine in London, is coming out with a graphic illustrated book soon, which is all about real options thinking. And he takes the financial thinking that every option, you want to basically keep the option open for as long as possible, but be able to execute it rapidly. We often work in very dynamic environments. Chris has worked a lot in finance. Things change so fast. You don't want to plan everything up front, but you do want to keep the options enough that you understand, hey, if the market does this, we could play A. If it does that, I want to play B. So you create these models. Back in a startup in 2003, San Francisco, we created an options model. And every quarter, we would get together, and I called it Roadmap Tetris. Do you know the game of Tetris? It's like a kid's game with little blocks, and you have to fit weird-shaped blocks together to make a total block of value. Instead of setting just one yearly budgeting, every quarter we'd get together, and each of those blocks was like an option that we could play out. And we'd say, which ones make us money, which ones save us money? Okay, that's what we're going to do next. So we kept doing what we call rolling-based planning. So the budgeting needs to also be very fluid if you're going to use this options model. Finally, we deliver, we measure, and we adapt. We're back into very familiar iterative territory. We want to execute rapidly, look at what's happening, and then adapt based on that. Again, you'll notice so far in the talk, it's a bit of a mashup, right? It's very quantitative data, but it's also about getting out and understanding the users. So you need to be doing both, not one without the exclusion of the other. The reason I call this guerrilla testing, and Stig, I put your donuts up. Stig the other day was saying my talk, because I hacked it together at 2 o'clock in the morning, it was very black and white. So now I've got pictures of donuts. This is because I had a lot of people saying to me, we don't have user researchers. We can't afford the budget to do this. And I'm like, really? It doesn't have to cost a lot. I was working with a woman from the police department in New Zealand, and she said the software they were building was so awful. So she worked for the government. She used to be a policewoman. She said it was so unusable. It was just painful, and it killed her. She felt bad writing such appalling software. And she said, but, they don't understand the users. This is back to the point, you've got to take people out to see it. So I said to her, how much does it cost for a taxi to get your team into the police department? I know, $20. Do they like donuts, the police people? Yeah, they actually do. So buy a box of donuts, go see your friends for the afternoon, take the development team. So they did. They piled into the taxi, went and saw them, and sat beside the police people in the afternoon. And they watched, and after a while they realized these people came in after a really hard day. It's pretty stressful work. They had to do all this paperwork and enter in all their time before they could go home. They're exhausted. They go in to do it, and of course the software's so horrible. So immediately, all the developers get inspired, run back, and they start changing the system, asking the police people, is this how's this working for you? Do you manage to do it quicker? Getting constant feedback. And that's what it took. For about $30, they did rapid user testing. So don't buy that excuse. And in fact, like I said earlier, research is too expensive to leave to the researchers. Have someone to design the experiments, but get your whole team out. Do what you can. And then prove it, don't plea it. How many people have been in those meetings when you've got very key stakeholders arguing? I think it's this. No, mine's the most important. No, the users don't want that. Instead of that, go and get the data again. It's very simple to run some simple tests. You can even mock up these things, get them in front of a real user, get some instant feedback. That way, you diffuse the emotion. We should not be making emotional decisions. We should be making scientific decisions based on validated learning. Okay, so this is where we get into these ABCD split testing. Even if you're building hardware, we can mock up a lot of things. We can get them in the hands of people. One of the teams who was doing testing on a new cash machine, the little ATM machines, that was great. They had a cardboard cutout. They had all the little slots on the machine. And when someone would go and put their card in, someone was behind the cardboard cutout taking the card, making little sounds, putting up a piece of paper showing the next screen. Someone would click it, and then they'd give them money back. Right? That's what they did. They didn't have to go and build the massive ATM machine. Big thing for us to remember, because it's so easy to write things like user stories in the Agile community, it's so easy to go so fast and build more code, is that we actually want to go for minimal viable, not maximum possible. The game has changed. Every time you think about getting a release out there, what's the smallest amount we could possibly put in to meet that goal? The great thing with target outcomes is that once we set them, people say, hey, I've got a great idea. Let's make it a quantum pearl, gold-plated, cool thing. And you're like, great, but how does that help Sue buy a book? Well, it doesn't really, but it'd be so cool. Right, yeah, we're not doing that, actually. So more output does not equal more value. In fact, more money to build it, more time to get it to market, more defects to kill your customers. I got this one from someone working in life-critical pharmaceuticals. She said every line of code we write can bring a defect into the system. Defects kill people. So we now have gone to this model. We're building 40% less of what we used to do. Our risk profile has dropped dramatically. And finally, more resources to kill our planet. It's kind of funny, but when you think about it, the more code we're running on servers, imagine how much power we are generating. So we, the Agile community, are speeding up the use of resources. So if we save the features, we save the world. Okay. So now I'm ready for questions. There's the product owner. So the question was, what do you do when you're a distributed team, your users are in another country speaking another language, your team they're not even literally speaking the same language, the product owner is the person communicating the needs through, and the product owner speaks the language of the users? Right. And what kind of product, if you can tell me, are you working on? A payroll system. Yeah. Now you can run, if the product owner goes on site to the customers, you can do remote viewing. Again, fast, dirty, cheap. I'll take little webcam, Skype, my computer, whatever, and we'll actually set it up that we can, and even have some live sites. So imagine that we go over, put in, I don't care what it is, laptop monitor, little webcam, have it aimed on the user, and have that set up so that if you've got a translation, the product owner can say, right, we want you to be able to enter your time into the system, whatever it is they have to do. Show us how that works. Your team can actually be viewing them do it to get the feeling for what they need to do. I'd probably, in that circumstance, be getting the product owner to learn a little bit about how to run some basic user testing. Because again, if you understand what the outcomes are for the customers, don't ask what they want. Again, a very dangerous question. Say, what's the aim? Well, we need to be able to do bi-monthly, whatever it is, payroll. We need to get these people in the system. Here are the outcomes. How available, what are the real goals for the user? If we can map that out, rather than the detailed requirements, it gives you a little more flexibility to try things, and again, get into a point where you can iterate and get them to test out things. You might have to do some paper prototyping, get your product owner to go over and run it with them. Again, ideally, I'd send some of the developers with them on site. Even if you can't speak the language fully, you can see what's going on. It's a difficult situation, and that means that if the product owner doesn't know what they're doing or translates it very well, it's going to be a big problem. Most distributed teams in general, I always suggest doing a lot of pictures. Draw things up, sketch out prototypes. I found when I worked with teams in India, we'd send a specification and any kind of picture, they'd just code off the picture. They wouldn't code off the spec. So I would suggest you start moving to a more visual style maybe to get things really on paper, fast, dirty, cheap, enough that it makes sense and brings it back. So there's a lot of materials up on things like paper prototyping or prototyping systems. I'd probably do a sketch out of that first. I don't know if that helps. Right, so the question was, just to make that a little quicker, it's you're building web products and the product owner is sort of drawing up the how very quickly, the sheets. Again, if you miss the earlier steps, you don't know why you're doing it. So this comes further down when we start sketching things up, running prototyping, etc. And even then, remember I talked about options, there is no one right answer. Therefore, we'd again do multiple versions. Hey, if you want to get to here, which is the easiest flow through? Again, there's better prototyping tools that let you do a bit more flow-based work as opposed to just static pages. But this, again, you have to know why. There's that, you reminded me of the story of the bricklayers, which you might have heard, the 3 bricklayers. And one bricklayer is putting up his bricks. He looks very unhappy. He's doing a bad job. He puts up the bricks. It's not very even, it's awful, and he's shoving them in. And the guy says, oh, what are you doing? And he said, I've got this crappy job, I'm putting bricks in, I don't get paid much, it's awful. All day in the hot sun putting up bricks, and he's whacking them in. Then he goes to there's another guy beside him, and he looks happier. He's doing a better job, he's putting up more bricks, doing a nice job. And I said, oh, what are you doing? And he said, oh, well, I've got this job, I'm an apprentice, I'm learning to be a bricklayer, so I'm learning a new craft, this is great, putting up the bricks. So another guy standing beside him, he is just smiling. He's so happy. He starts putting up the bricks, a beautiful one. He makes sure it's straight, another one. He's very quick, but doing a beautiful, beautiful job. He said, what are you building? And he said, oh, I'm building a cathedral. So this is, if we just tell people, go implement this, we're treating them like the bricklayer with a crappy job, which is how many developers feel. If we tell them, hey, we're building a cathedral, why? We want to speak to God, or whatever you're doing there. So this is the thing, to both inspire, and of course you're going to say, we need it to be about this high, we need to keep it in these costs, we need to make sure that the quality levels are here. And so, again, if you skip this step, every developer is going to feel like a bricklayer, you're going to get code that looks like those badly put together bricks. Yeah, so we're talking about the product owner becoming a bottleneck. It's a big issue, especially... So while we have product owners in the Agile community, Toyota has the chief engineer, but their job is to facilitate the team, to get them understanding what they're building. They work together. They often take the teams out to do the user testing. I met with the chief engineer of Lexus once when I was in Japan. I was asking about his development process, and he said, yeah, he got into automotive engineering because he loves racing cars. He loves fast cars. When they worked on the Lexus, they went to Europe, and they all got given a Porsche or a Mercedes, these luxury fast cars. And he sort of laughed and said, yes, I never once got a speeding ticket. So obviously, he really tried them out. And but that's what they do. They all go out and do this, And so I think the idea that we have one single voice doesn't mean one single only voice. When you've got that bottleneck happening, again, I try to get people into this target outcomes. This is what we're going to measure. How are we going to validate? If we say that we think that someone should be able to buy a book within X amount of time, how are we validating it? It's not you, product owner, but we're talking about Aunt Marge, who's never used a computer much in her life. So, if you have the measures, you've discussed how you're going to validate them, set up the experiments first, then try to get it out to users. It can be really difficult, and if that becomes a blocker, if the product's not working, you do have to fix it. So, I'd sort of, again, most people try their best. They probably think they are doing their best. You need to re-educate and say, hey, this is a way that let's get better testing going. Let's validate it early and often. It's a great idea. Yeah, so the question is, have you applied it to something like brand awareness? To me, everything is infinitely measurable. So if we say brand awareness, how would you test that there is brand awareness out there? Can you ask people surveys, is the data reliable? Without thinking about it, it's hard to answer, but I'd be thinking about the experiment. So you sort of start at the end. You're reverse engineering your whole process by saying, if we want brand awareness, how are we going to test that? And you will be able to think of tests. If you're worried that, if you just ask someone on the street, is that going to give you the right idea? But maybe you do things like, if you did guerrilla style and you're just putting a new logo out, maybe you go and do some posters with this little logo sitting on it, somewhere where people walk to work, even if it's people from your work or something else, and just say, hey, if you were looking at it, do you remember what company this is? You can do some funny little experiments just to trigger things. Again, not perfect, but maybe it gives you more. To me, I prefer in context testing. So when you do usability labs, you get 5 random people off the street. Whereas when you do something like, the multivariate testing, we can test with thousands of people instantly in the right context. So if you really want to check branding, you've got to do it in context. So be putting it in different places, trying, there's all sorts of things you could do. You could do little brain tests that you throw up, a little IQ test. Do you remember the last memory thing of this? Win a prize, And then which ones at the end, ask the little question. By the way, whose logo is this? There's all sorts of quite fun things you could do there. Right? And then once you set them up, if that's the game, how do we test that fast, dirty, cheap without spending a lot of time on doing it? That's time? Stig? Yeah? I'll just take one more question. Yeah, one more. Okay, we're done. Thank you, everybody.